Little chin music? Hey, Barry, we're both alphas. I understand.
No, that's not what I did. Look, when I get angry, I don't like who I become.
Listen to me. I have a son. I was terrible to this son. I was cruel. I was selfish. And there's nothing I can do to change that. But I don't want to be that guy anymore. And I pray that human beings can change their nature. Because if we can't, then you and I are in deep trouble.
You should call the cops.
The cops?
I'm gonna turn myself off.
Oh, wow.
What a week has it been for television. I can't even describe the emotional drain that I felt after finishing the finales of Barry and Succession back to back. But for now, let's focus on Barry. What I'll say about the final season is that it is some of the most bold filmmaking that I've seen in a while, at least in regards to TV shows. The narrative turns, the darker tone, the cinematography all really surprised me. I already published a video on the channel in which I outlined why I was put off by these changes, but I have to also admit that I've grown to appreciate the swing with more time. Personally, I didn't find much humor during the last season with the exception of a few key scenes, but I was also told after my last video on Barry that people found this season hilarious. Bill Hader himself mentioned on the Prestige TV podcast that the 5th episode of this season is funny to him, and I guess it's just not my humor. I'm just gonna say that. So to reiterate, the humor wasn't my cup of tea, but I wouldn't want to yuck anyone's yum. And if I've learned anything from my previous videos, even this opinion will be considered as me quote-unquote not liking the show, which honestly couldn't be further from the truth. I think the finale cements the show as a classic. I will always appreciate a big swing more than a traditional ending. But to discuss this more, let's dive in. HBO's Barry has questioned its titular protagonist's motivations from the first season onwards. Barry is a killer who wants to change his ways and become a better person by acting. However, he never deals with his underlying problems, which appear in the form of anger issues. The 5th episode of the 4th season seems to imply that Barry has fixed these issues by turning to religion, for him to once again turn to his violent side when he hears that Kusuno is consulting in a movie about him. The way I see it is that Barry has 3 justifications for the killing. He either protects himself, protects those he loves, or wants revenge when he is betrayed. This doesn't work as an actual justification, of course. Barry is ultimately selfish anytime that he takes a life, which is reinforced during the 3rd season when the families of the people he has killed come after him. Furthermore, Barry's killing ultimately ruins the lives of those around him. Sally wouldn't be traumatized if the biker guy wasn't coming after Barry. Kusuno wouldn't be in jail at the end of the show if Barry hadn't shown up. The crux of the show is expecting Barry to change his ways for the better, and he does, but it's far too late. The promise to stop killing after Janice Moss, the terrifying realization that he has after killing all the gangsters at the monastery, the near-death vision during the end of season 3, and the turn to religion in the final season all indicate that Barry might be able to change. But the fact is that all these events only halt Barry's killing for a while. There's a quote about the differences between drama and comedy which goes something like this.
Drama is about watching characters change. Comedy is watching the characters stay the same despite themselves.
Now, unfortunately, I don't remember where this is from. I'm 90% sure that it's from a skip intro video, but I don't remember which one. Sorry about that. But it does apply to Barry. I was dissuaded from this notion throughout the final season until the last episode. Barry really can't change despite himself. Barry doesn't change when he goes out to save John. He doesn't change when Sally and John leave. He doesn't even change when he goes to Kusuno's house. He only changes when he realizes that Sally and John aren't there. To me, this is the moment where Barry finally realizes that he has become a man that Sally has to run away from. He has become Sam. someone Barry was ready to break his no-kill rule for during the second season. And at this key moment of realization, Kusuno enters the room and shoots him dead.
Oh, wow.
I found this scene not only to be surprising but also weirdly funny. There's something bizarrely dark about ending the titular character's arc so unceremoniously. It's a thing that I would often be put off by, but in this moment, I honestly just found it funny. Barry has been struggling to find his humanity throughout the entire series, and the moment he does, he is killed. There's something oddly tragic about that notion. This death isn't heroic at all. It shows how bizarrely lucky Barry has been up to this point. Nobody has been able to shoot Barry like this before in the show. Another interesting thing about this scene was that Kusuno isn't all that different from Barry in this scene. Gene also has essentially lost everything. Losing his career and his son pushes him over the edge to the point where he sinks to Barry's level. I've talked about Barry's attempts at change extensively, but what I've neglected to mention is that Gene also goes through a sort of change throughout the show. Gene is extremely egotistical and self-centered at the beginning of the series, but he manages to become a better father and less egotistical as the series goes on. I bought his redemption arc during season 3, in which he not only amended old rivalries, but also betrayed Barry, staying true to his love for Janice Moss. And then in season 4 he becomes egotistical again, but only now tries to hide it from Jim Moss and his son. He becomes less egotistical once again after going to Israel for 8 years, but once again flips when he hears that Daniel Day-Lewis is going to portray him in the dramatization. I mean, I would flip too, to be honest. Just like Barry, Gene stays the same despite himself. Now, I want to talk about the dramatization of Barry's life, but before that, I'm going to have to discuss the way that Barry has portrayed violence so far and how the show comments on violent media in general. HBO's Barry has always been a narrative that questions the morality of its titular character, but the narrative also questions the wider implications of violence and depictions of violence in the media. This latter point became very clear during the final season. The prison guards don't care that Barry has killed someone. They are excited that someone who was on TV is in their cell block. The original film adaptation about Barry gets spun up as a cat and mouse thriller where Mark Wahlberg isn't willing to play Barry because he feels like a villain. The show's stance on violence has been interesting since the beginning. The show wants us to question Barry's morality anytime he kills someone, but then again the show itself makes these scenes often very entertaining. The show has numerous scenes which illustrate this exact point. The first thing that comes to my mind will always be the end of season 2, in which Barry takes out the gangsters in the monastery. The first time that I watched that scene, I found it to be thrilling, and I'll be honest, I still do find it thrilling, even though the show hints that this isn't supposed to be a good thing that Barry is doing. The show has always been open about the fact that Barry's killing isn't something that should be celebrated, but then again I have always found the way that his killing sprees are depicted extremely entertaining. It's the same way that Walter White cooking meth isn't necessarily a good thing, but I do love watching him cook meth. It is entertaining because it is directed to be entertaining. What I'm trying to get at here is that the show deliberately presents one type of scene to the audience and then pulls the rug from underneath them. And that's not a bad thing at all. I was completely absorbed by the violence in the show, only to be reminded of what actually just happened. 1 minute it feels like you're watching a funnier version of John Wick, and then all of a sudden the show forces you to recognize the outcome of these actions. The way the show blends these elements together is masterful. The critique of gun violence also became a central source of comedy in the later seasons of Barry. Season 3 especially leans on this, as there is absurdity in the way that no one reacts to the highway chase during episode 6. In the absurdist world of Barry, the civilians have become so accustomed to gun violence that it doesn't cause mass hysteria when people are shooting guns on the highway.
Oh yeah, some kid shot up the school.
Who shot up the school? Was it you?
No.
Did you get shot?
No.
Oh. Well, what's this about failing a math quiz?
The final season leans into this even more with the 2 times that Barry goes to buy guns. The first time he has to look at a picture of bodies turned to shreds by gunfire, and the second time he buys an assault rifle, a shotgun and a pistol, and nonchalantly walks through a children's toy section. The show makes it a point to illustrate how easy it is for a wanted villain like Barry to acquire a weapon. Another key detail in the show has always been a smart juxtaposition between the crime world and the world of show business. The world of Sally and Jean is very different from the world of Fuchs and NoHo Hank, with Barry being the link between the two. Ultimately, these 2 threads lead up to the final scene of the show, in which the events of the narrative are retold in a fictional dramatization about Barry's life. I'm not gonna lie, I found this extremely blunt during my first watch, but kind of warmed up to it on a later rewatch. This, of course, is a way of commenting on how pop culture changes true stories into fiction, leaving the truth out of the equation. It's a combination of the Hollywood critique and the gun violence critique that the show has been utilizing throughout its run. Many have pointed out haters' love of true crime as the inspiration behind this choice. What it reminded me of was the differences between Steve Jobs, the Danny Boyle film, and Steve Jobs, the Walter Isaacson biography. These based on a true story narratives often seem to fail at depicting reality, and the reason is very simple. There often isn't rhyme or reason for the events that expire in our day-to-day lives. People don't have philosophical debates about morality before a product launch. Sometimes events happen randomly in real life. In fiction, this doesn't really make sense, as we, the audience, want to be able to see the arc of the events. The reason Chekhov's gun is utilized in writing is because a person pulling a revolver from out of nowhere suddenly isn't very satisfying and feels too easy from a writing perspective. Not only does the ending of Barry recontextualize the events that have transpired throughout the show, but it also cements the kind of story that HBO's Barry is. Skip Intro has a fantastic video essay about Barry and toxic masculinity, in which he mentions that Barry feels like an answer to the other male protagonists of the prestige TV era. You can't really watch Barry and come out the other side thinking that Barry was justified in his actions. The same should apply to Walter White and other problematic protagonists, but as the discourse has shown, things aren't that simple. On top of that, Barry is also in conversation with other violent media. The show has always made it a point to illustrate that Barry doesn't just kill bad people. What differentiates Barry from your average John Wick-style action hero is that Barry carries the traumas of killing. John Wick's revenge is questioned throughout the series, but the message is pretty clear. These people wronged John Wick, and now they're gonna pay for it. As I already mentioned, I can't in good conscience say that I didn't enjoy watching Barry kill loads of gangsters at the end of Season 2. Seasons 3 and 4, and especially the finale of the series, illustrates that wanting Barry to be violent again is wrong. But then again, it was the show itself that first gave me that thrill. Of course, the finale of Season 2 also did show that this action wasn't good for Barry, as it sends him to a very dark place, which we see throughout Season 3. I don't want to drone on about a topic that could be its own video essay in itself, so I'll finish this section with the following. I've never seen a series like Barry that both utilizes the anti-hero trope as well as comments on the violence that said protagonist inflicts on others, while also being genuinely funny at the same time. Honestly, nothing else comes to mind in this regard. Maybe something like The Boys, but even that comparison feels disingenuous because that show is about people with superpowers, and the utilization of the anti-hero trope isn't as clear as it is with Barry, in my opinion. The main point that I'm trying to make here is that Barry is truly unique in its narrative and presentation, and I'm really glad that they were able to finish the show with a swing like this.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Now there's one quote-unquote issue that I would like to raise, and once again, going by YouTube comment logic, this doesn't mean that the show is bad in my opinion, okay? I just want to discuss this one element because it rubbed me the wrong way. I'm referring to the Kusuno Jim Moss plotline, which ends in Moss coming to the conclusion that Kusuno hired Barry to kill Janice. This is because he reads Lan's notebook, which details all the events from Kusuno's perspective, but then again, as we saw from his one-man play, it wasn't exactly truthful. Also, Barry says that,
Honestly, I'm trying to fix things. I'm trying to give you that money. $250,000.
even though he did give Kusuno the money. I don't know, I found this kind of weird. Later on, Moss and the gang trick Kusuno into humanizing Barry. He only does this because he wants Mark Wahlberg to feel comfortable portraying Barry in the adaptation, as Mark Wahlberg doesn't do villains, you see? Kusuno takes the bait, and the gang comes to the conclusion that Kusuno shot Leo because Leo found out that his house was paid for with Chechen drug money. Except Leo didn't find out that his house was paid with drug money. He suspects that something weird is going on, but then again, the time that Kusuno gave him the money was the time that Kusuno's career was starting up again. Maybe he had saved up the money over time. Did he get an acting gig for $250,000? No, that's insane for an actor at Kusuno's level. However, I think there's still more logic in Gene getting this money by legal means rather than him working with the Chechen mob. Like, what is the reasoning that Kusuno would work with them? Like, is he peddling drugs to his students? Like, is there something I'm missing here? I genuinely don't understand this point. The line, "I should have given you that money," keeps puzzling me. It's gotten to the point where I've come to the conclusion that I must be stupid because I don't get what the show is trying to do here. As I already mentioned, Barry does give that money to Kusuno, so him saying, "I should have given you that money," is a lie. The ending wouldn't be different if Barry said, "I tried to fix things and that's why I gave you the money." This would, in my opinion, make more sense for Jim Moss to connect the dots. Why would Barry give Kusuno $250,000? Oh, it's because he adores Kusuno and clearly would do anything for him, even kill or hide a corpse. And this specific point is not a big deal. I don't want to make it out to be like a giant issue with the ending or something like that. It's just one of those things that I really don't see the logic behind. Is Barry lying a more clear implication to Jim Moss that Kusuno is manipulating him? I don't know. Does Moss assume that Barry thinks that he's been abducted by Moss and Kusuno? Once again, I don't know. The gang concludes that Kusuno had been working with the Chechens and that he had Barry kill Janice Moss because she was onto Kusuno's dealings with the Chechens. Well, anyway, this turn of events is an extension of the finale of Season 1 where Ryan Madison was made out to be the fall guy who worked with the Chechens even though it was Barry all along. I don't have a problem with the fact that the show spun this plotline again, as the show has displayed that cops aren't very capable in this show. That element works, although I also assume that Jim Moss specifically would be a bit smarter. I mean, this is a guy that can make people forget their native language after all. I know I'm reflecting too much quote-unquote logic to this finale when it's not clearly interested in that. To borrow from Andy Greenwald of the Watch podcast, shows teach the viewers how to watch them. And HBO's Barry has always had some element of absurdity in its turn of events. Jim Moss's interrogation technique is, as far as I know, unlike anything that exists in the real world. But on a script level, it does feel awfully convenient. All of this hinges on the fact that Barry doesn't admit anything too incriminating to Jim Moss and escapes his house rather easily afterwards. Like seriously, even though Jim Moss comes to believe that Barry only killed Janice on the behest of Kusuno, or at least hid her body, you would think that Moss would still be interested in keeping Barry secure. Another thing that stuck out to me was that Albert is still out there and he definitely knows that Barry was actually a hitman. Maybe Albert gets Barry's whole story later on by watching the film dramatization, or maybe he really doesn't want to snitch on a veteran friend of his. Sally doesn't come out of hiding to correct the record, even though she was the one who urged Barry to help Gene in the first place. I am of the belief that Sally only does this to get rid of Barry, so maybe she doesn't care about Kusuno after all. This could also be due to Sally either wanting to leave it all behind, wanting to preserve the heroic image of Barry for John, or maybe she recognizes that if she reveals what she knows, some blame will also be pointed towards her. Now, I'm not saying that the show should have wrapped up all these plot lines. It's just that for me personally, it feels like the show is asking a bit too much. What I want is for the show to consistently write characters into corners that seem inescapable, only for them to come up with a solution that I hadn't expected. You know, like the show has done previously. The ending of Season 2 does this perfectly, in my opinion. Season 4 presents a solution on how Barry once again gets out of trouble, but the circumstances for this to occur are so random that it doesn't feel earned. And I mean that on the part of the screenwriters, not on the part of Barry as a character. I love the twisted irony of Gene Cousineau becoming the fall guy, while Barry's legacy becomes that of a heroic figure. I think someone on Reddit mentioned that the show started out as Barry wanting to become an actor, and it ended with Gene becoming a killer. The irony is incredible. I just don't fully agree with the way that this endpoint was achieved. That's pretty much it. I wish I had more time to talk about Sally Fuchs and NoHo Hank, but this video is becoming too long already, and I have to get this out by the end of the week. Before I progress into the subscribe and like my video stuff, I would heartily request show recommendations. I have a void in my heart now that Barry and Succession have wrapped up, and I would like to hear your opinions. What are you gonna be watching? Bonus points for shows that are either on Netflix or Max, as here in Finland we get the other shows like 6 months late. Would love to hear some recommendations on that front. Alright, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and subscribe and like the video, leave a comment, etc, etc, and I'll see you in the next one.